Mr. Kuseni Dlamini, he's a business person and the chairperson of Massmart Holdings and Aspen Pharmacare. Mr. Dlamini, very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome.
Good, very appreciative of being here. Yeah. Good evening to you and the watchers of SABC.
Your reactions to the president's speech and, about the imposition of drastic measures?
I think the measures are very comprehensive. They're very encouraging, they're very bold, and they're very decisive. And they are to be supported. I think all sectors of South African society have got to mobilize the resources and capabilities that they have at their disposal to be able to assist the bold effort that the president and the government are leading to try and push back against this pandemic.
Yeah, you just mentioned the bold efforts and which need to be supported. But then, we shouldn't run away from the fact that it's going to hit business very hard. It's going to hit the labor force very hard. So how can business and labor be cushioned against the adverse effects and impact of these measures?
There will be need for some creative thinking around some policy interventions and instruments to be able to mitigate the adverse impact on the economy in general. There's no doubt that in the short to medium term, growth, employment, confidence, business confidence and consumer confidence are going to be impacted, and we've seen the stock markets being impacted severely this past week. So I think we need to think about fiscal stimulus. We need to think about sectors that are more vulnerable, like the tourism sector, the aviation sector, and many other sectors, and maybe categories of employees that will be directly and severely impacted, need some kind of support of some sort. There's a need for a coalition of the willing to emerge, a need for a cross-sectoral conversation at a strategic level across business, civil society, government to come with a collective response. Because this is something that is indeed a national disaster, as the president called it.
So would I be jumping the gun, Mr. Dlamini, if I were to suggest that this will certainly, in the medium to long term, lead to a partial shutdown of the economy? For instance, the manufacturing sector, in factories where there are over 100 people working under the same roof, because one of the measures that have been called by the government is to, the prohibition of gatherings of more than 100 people.
Oh, absolutely. That's almost inescapable. In dealing with a disaster like this, you've got to take those very strong measures. They come with a lot of pain. They come with a lot of sacrifice, but I think we need to think creatively and proactively in terms of how we can best mitigate the pain. The pain is inescapable. It's unavoidable. It's a massive crisis. It needs a massive response, a comprehensive response, and it needs thinking outside the box, as we saw how comprehensive the measures that have been announced are.
In as much as, the measures should, they've been bold, as you just mentioned, but the economy should not grind to a halt. The president was not so clear as to how that can be prevented. For instance, the citrus sector in South Africa wants to know how the government will solve the potential crisis at the country's sea and land ports. And as you've heard earlier on from the president saying that he will pull the plug on some of the land and the sea ports. The citrus sector, for instance, we've got a huge consignment which are ready for exportation, perishable consignments at that. So how can that be sorted out?
This pandemic is very unique in terms of its impact, in the sense that it's impacting both demand and supply chains at a local and global level in ways that are almost unprecedented in recent history. So it is inescapable that some sectors of the economy obviously are almost in a semi-shutdown kind of situation. You look at the global aviation industry, the hospitality sector, tourism industry. These are industries that are immediately and directly affected and impacted. Even our mining industry, exports to China, even our manufacturing industry, almost every company that I know of in terms of global supply chains, all routes tend to lead to China. And we're also a major trading partner with the EU, and the EU is the second most affected and infected region in as far as this virus is concerned. And the measures that target certain countries in the EU, which are major trading partners. Germany, for example, is the second largest destination for South African exports after China, and it's impacted, and China is impacted. So your point is correct. There is going to be a serious impact on some sectors.
This has obviously triggered a very vicious domino effect. I mean, one sector will be affecting the other sector. For instance, the global aviation sector, the global tourism sector, the banking sector, for instance, they'll all be affected. So will this not, in the medium to long term, lead to a global recession?
It is almost inevitable that it will. There is also, the IMF has also started revising the global growth outlook. I think that's been reduced by 0.5% from 2.9 to 2.4. Some are calling it at even lower than 2%. It's around 1.5%. And if global growth is impacted as an economy that is inextricably intertwined with the global economy, we are going to be impacted. That is why, again, I think you also need a coordinated global response, a coordinated regional response in the context of the African Union, and maybe sub-regional response in the context of SADC, because economies are going to be impacted. You probably will need some kind of stimulus, just like we saw during the 2008 crisis, at a global level, at a regional level, and also at a national economic level.
And I suppose what makes it even more difficult is the fact that there are no timelines. You don't know how long this virus will affect us.
You're right, Simpiwe. This is like a black swan event. You cannot really predict where it's heading and what the next step will be. You wake up one day, the statistics are at a certain level. By the end of the day, those statistics have increased exponentially. So it's really a serious crisis, which is why it really requires collective and coordinated action across all sectors of society.
So in terms of protecting the economy, cushioning us against the effects of this virus, what should we do? What should emerging market economies do?
I think we will need a stimulus. I think that there has to be a discussion on what kind of stimulus, what's the quantum, what's affordable, what's doable. And we also need to have this conversation. The G8 economies have got to come to the party, the G7 economies, if they can coordinate well and also inject stimulus at a global level, because the global economy is so interconnected. As emerging markets and as an emerging market, we're also going to benefit from that. But we cannot also wait for the outside world. I think we need to show leadership in South Africa by working together to find the solutions that are going to take us out of this crisis.
So in terms of recovery, do you think it's going to take a long time to recover from this?
These crises tend to take quite a long time to really recover and return us to a state of normalcy. But it will also depend what China does. It will depend what the G8 countries do. It will depend what we do in terms of what we can control. If we're very smart, we are coordinated, we are efficient and effective in terms of pulling the levers that we can pull, in terms of maybe encouraging investment, domestic investment, encouraging domestic consumption, and assisting certain sectors to be able to stand on their own on the basis of domestic productive forces. I think that's what we need to look at while watching what the rest of the world will be doing.
You know, some pundits have been fiercely criticizing government's move for repatriating some of the South Africans from Wuhan city, the epicenter of this coronavirus, saying that the cost of repatriating them was much, much higher, and the fact that there was, heightened risk of bringing the infections to South Africa. But I suppose then that the cost of not addressing it will be much higher.
Absolutely, yes. I think you are faced with almost two crude choices. Either you do nothing, you watch the virus, the pandemic unfold, or you take decisive measures. And sometimes decisive measures require sacrifice, require taking, a bitter pill.
And I guess it's damned if you do and damned if you don't.
In the ultimate analysis, it seems inescapable that damned if you do it and damned if you don't. But what is encouraging, the South African authorities have really been good, especially on the communication side. Yeah. Minister Zwelini Mkhize has been excellent in leading the interministerial effort to keep South Africans informed and raise awareness across the piece. I think we need an intensification of that. It was good to see controllers are coming out and saying we need the communication to be in all the South African languages so that it can reach all South Africans. I think that's important as well, and everybody's got to play a role. Business, traditional leaders, trade unions, NGOs, and government.
Indeed, no doubt that the communication aspect from the health department has been widely credited from all the sectors. Do you think that the position of South Africans, because most South Africans haven't been taking this disease much more seriously, but then I think we've seen a change of attitude. Do you think that it's as a result of the communications channels that have been opened by Minister Zwelini Mkhize?
I think so. I think it's a direct result of that. The heightened awareness that we have. You're seeing it in people's rules behavior everywhere in public places, people washing their hands and taking care of the hygiene, and also having sanitizers and really making sure that they stay clean and people are careful. I mean, you were a good example when I came here. We didn't shake hands and we used the Wuhan greeting.
Right, right. So in terms then of, because I've been reading an article with regards to the global shutdown. So do you think that in the long term will affect South Africa?
I think in the long term it will affect South Africa, it will affect the global economy, and that is why we now need to be that much creative and that much deliberate in terms of creating the right conditions for growth. If we announce certain measures during the budget speech which didn't factor this virus, we need to revisit all those interventions which were designed to boost the economy and maybe double down in terms of coming up with creative interventions that are going to stimulate growth. I think our future and our destiny is in our hands. We cannot leave it in the global economy. I think we have what it takes to manage this crisis and emerge out of it, and emerge being a very strong, viable economy, just by focusing on domestic productive forces and focusing on really making all the structural reforms that we've been debating and talking about, and maybe moving fast on that and delivering more on some of the reforms and the changes and improving efficiencies across the board. I think that can be done.
You know, you will agree with me, Mr. Dlamini, that in every crisis there's always opportunity. I suppose then that the huge pharmaceutical companies will stand to benefit from this.
You don't look at it like that. This is a crisis. You really rather not have a crisis like this. You rather want to benefit from a growing economy as a company. Actually, we'd rather have growth at 5%, rather have unemployment below 20%. And as a company,
but you can't escape the fact that pharmaceutical companies will definitely benefit from this, because now scientists are trying to find a cure.
Certain sections of the healthcare industry, of course.
In that regard, pharmaceutical companies will definitely benefit.
Certain sections of the healthcare industry and certain industries, if you're selling hand sanitizers, you're selling certain products that are useful in terms of helping people, prevent this virus. Certainly, those products are in high demand.
Sure. Mr. Dlamini, thank you so much for it.
Thank you very much indeed.
Much appreciated.
Great to be here.